Well, I'm now joined by Brian Johnson Thomas. He's an arms trafficking expert for the UN Security Council, joining me live in the UK. Thanks very much indeed for being with us here on RT. Now, you are a global arms trafficking expert. Just how much do you think trafficking is going on in Libya right now?
Well, we don't know how much Colonel Gaddafi's had because there is, in theory, an arms embargo. Certainly after the arms embargo was announced, there were flights into Tripoli for those few days before the bombing campaign started from a variety of destinations. And there were strange flights from, for example, Damascus, from various parts of Central Asia and elsewhere. Certainly the French have now said that they're dropping weapons, I think, in southwest of Tripoli as well.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Despite this arms embargo, the French have indeed admitted to dropping weapons into a certain situation where they're saying those civilians were under threat of being massacred by Gaddafi's military. There's a dilemma there. Aren't they right in helping those civilians by dropping those arms in the name of a humanitarian mission?
That seems to me a very strange way of going about it. I mean, I thought the arms embargo, as laid down by the Security Council, was quite clear, that it was arms to both sides were embargoed.
And what about those arms that are reaching the country and perhaps getting into the wrong hands? Is there a danger of that happening, for example, Al-Qaeda or drug traffickers, and potentially destabilising the country even further?
Well, the interesting thing is that until recently, Al-Qaeda was present in Libya, we know. We know that, for example, some of the militants from Somalia went to Libya for training within the last 2 or 3 years. That's documented. We have the flight records and everything else. So it seems strange, in many ways, the whole Western support of some of the rebel groups in Libya must be questioned. Because in some cases, I think we are effectively arming Al-Qaeda. So
it's impossible to keep a track of those weapons which are supposedly going to what the authorities would say legitimate recipients?
Absolutely. All guns start off being legal, but when they get diverted, they go God knows where. And, of course, with a gun, you're in a position to commit various human rights abuses.
But isn't that the answer, though, to end this conflict as soon as possible, to supply weapons to this problem to those who need it? Isn't that the way forward?
No, it's not, because in any case, if you're supplying small arms and light weapons, they're not necessarily the decisive things you need. I mean, Colonel Gaddafi's got quite a large, quite a well-organised army. Are you going to take on anti-armoured vehicles with small arms? No, you require fairly sophisticated missile systems to do that, anti-tank guided weapons, and they require training and involvement, and you can't do it in 5 minutes.
Well, exactly.
And again, you have the problem...
Sorry to interrupt, but the rebels are made up, what, mostly of civilians. They wouldn't know how to handle those weapons, so who is training them if they are receiving these weapons? Yeah,
so all this, of course, tends to predicate a long conflict, unless Colonel Gaddafi does decide to give up and go away.
And that's not likely to happen, is it? So do you think that Gaddafi could cling on and perhaps even survive this?
It's difficult to say, because at some point, presumably, the people who work for him will have to make the decision whether they carry on doing so or they go elsewhere. It's interesting, though, that yesterday the South African Deputy Foreign Minister said something to the effect that if Colonel Gaddafi came, they would let him stay in Cape Town for a limited time if they were asked.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting development there. Brian, thanks so much for sharing us your thoughts there live from Worcester there in the UK. Brian, sorry, I've just lost your name for a second. Brian Johnson Thomas, I beg your pardon, arms trafficking expert for the UN Security Council. Thanks so much for joining us.